Hey, this is Colin Meeks, and I'm here with Ryan Stark, and welcome to another episode of our podcast, The Financial Advocate. And today we're going to talk about one of the most important pieces of paper in your financial file at home. And what I'm talking about is the beneficiary form that you have for your accounts. Now this form can be for a retirement account, an IRA, a 401k, a bank account. It can be for a life insurance policy. It can be for pretty much anything that you can name a beneficiary or a transfer on death form for. And so I want to spend some time and talk about this because what we find is when we're doing our reviews with new clients and existing clients is a lot of times this stuff just falls out of date or it's never done correctly to begin with. And naming a beneficiary on an account is one of the most powerful things you can do. Because it allows those assets to go to who you want to and when you want them to transfer. So it's a very important piece of paper. So Ryan, let's talk a little bit about beneficiaries. How do we go through this with clients?
So we would look at everything they have and know, if it's an individual account or something, you're looking for a transfer on death. If it's retirement, you're just looking for beneficiaries attached to it. Could be, an annuity or life insurance. You want to make sure the beneficiary is correct, and looking at different things. So depending on the account, depends on, I guess, where the beneficiary would be or how we attach it. But almost everything can be like a TOD or a POD or something that that transfers to somebody else. So we're really trying to make sure that whatever you have is going to the right person if it's capable of doing so.
Right, and TOD or POD is transfer on death or pay on death. So those are sort of industry terms that we use on forms. But just know that just because you can't add a beneficiary on something doesn't mean you can't work around that and name a beneficiary. And this podcast sort of comes out of something, we did a webinar in the middle of last year called How to Avoid the Beneficiary and Inheritance Minefield. And we've identified 14 mistakes that we see people make in naming their beneficiaries. We're not going to run through all those on this podcast. We try to keep these things short and sweet and to the point, but we will post a couple of things to the podcast notes. And number one will be the slides to that beneficiary minefield webinar. And the second thing is we've come up with, and we use this with our meetings, it's the beneficiary checklist and update form. And it's basically just a one sheet, and it tells you, how to go about updating and keeping your beneficiaries most up to date. So why dedicate all this time to beneficiaries? Number one, mistakes do happen. And Ryan and I can both attest to this, that, in our initial meeting with clients, we'll be sitting there and they'll have an ex-wife or an ex-husband attached to an account that they didn't know. It's an old 401k or an old pension plan. And there's stories all over the place where, families just get into all kinds of legal disputes as far as, why beneficiaries are the way they are and they haven't been updated, and people that you don't want to get money get money. So mistakes do happen. The second reason is that we spend a lot of time on it is because there's been some different companies that come up with different ways to leave money to people, and their beneficiary forms have changed over the years. It's not just a straightforward type thing, so there's different ways to do that. Ryan, we just went through a case with a couple where we went through how different beneficiary designations work, and I don't want to get into the details of the per stirpes and pro rata, but they wanted different designations, right?
Yep, I remember that exactly.
So there was a husband and wife, and they wanted their son to get money one way because he can manage money in a certain way. They wanted to make sure that if something happened to him, that money went a certain way. So there was certain designations, and you can sort of control these things. They call it control beyond the grave, which is kind of a dark term, but you can, knowing when you name beneficiaries to things, that there are certain designations that you can do and make so that you take care of your family. And this is not meant to trump any legal planning or any trust planning that you may have in place, but beneficiary planning, what a lot of people don't realize is that if you name a beneficiary on something, whether it be a life insurance policy or a retirement account or anything, it never hits a will. So you could have assets split one way in a will, and because there's something that passes directly outside of probate into your heirs, it'll never hit that will. So that's very important to remember. People say, well, I don't need to worry about my beneficiaries because my will is up to date. Well, yeah, you do, because if you've got 3 kids and you named all 3 of them equally in your will, but on your beneficiary form it says something else, that beneficiary form is going to override what's in the will. So let's talk about a couple of other mistakes that people make in naming their beneficiaries, Ryan. What's another big one we see?
I'd like to jump in actually when you mentioned something about the trust. After sitting in a few meetings with our clients, we'll go to the attorney's office if the client wants us to or allows us to,
Right.
just to stay involved with the whole planning process. But when I would do that, I would see that, and then you made a video about this actually recently that we put on Facebook, where that a trust is a box, and if you don't designate it as the beneficiary, then it's an empty box that's never get used.
Right.
I think a lot of people actually think that once they get the trust documents, it almost acts as a will, and you say, look at this. But really, what you need to do is add your trust as your primary beneficiary or your contingent, whatever you decide with your attorney, to make sure that all of your assets are actually going in there. One of the biggest mistakes I see that people don't fund their trust because they think they're done when they leave the office, but there's work to be done. Unfortunately, it's the work that usually the person who just got the trust needs to do. An attorney doesn't go that far. They don't look into the assets. They tell them, go fix this. But if we weren't there, I can see how people are just accidentally dropping the ball and not switching anything, and then they pay $3,500 for something that doesn't even get used.
Right, and they never take the time to title assets into the trust. They never take the time to name the trust as beneficiary if that's their case. So yeah, that's a huge deal. I mean, an empty box doesn't really do you any good. Record keeping is another thing that we see a lot of times. People, they just don't, with the digital age that we're in now, it's very easy to scan and keep copies of things. So a lot of times we see people they just don't keep good records. They don't, they have an outdated beneficiary form that they're not sure if that's the latest one. So it's always good to, a lot of times we'll spend time with clients on the phone, calling all those different places and saying, hey, send us a copy of the updated beneficiary form. We need to have that. And it takes a little bit of time because you're digging through phone mazes and dealing with people that sometimes don't want to help you, but it really does put the mind at ease knowing that, hey, I've taken the time to do it. And once you do it one time and you've got those copies, then it doesn't need to be done anymore. But the beneficiary checklist that we do, Ryan, let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
On the second page of that, we've got, I said it was one page, it's double-sided. So we've got 4 or 5 yes or no questions. So we'll put a copy of this underneath the show notes, but based on those 4 or 5 questions, you can really sit down, and even if you don't do a financial plan, you can plan out beneficiaries, and I think these are very important. The overall intentions on the account, a lot of times, Ryan, will see people just want to do a lot of different things with their assets. They want them to pass on to different relatives and heirs and grandkids and things like that. So take us through, Ryan, what do you see when we deal with people with that?
Well, one thing I notice is that people like to leave. I mean, we have some people who have 15 beneficiaries, where they have, a church,
Right.
Every niece and nephew, all children, grandchildren if they can. Everybody's getting at least a little bit. Going through, looking through this list, asking these questions to make sure that they're going to the right person. Sometimes we have one person who's just sending it to a spouse, and it's important to look through who you want the money to go to, because that may determine which beneficiary gets certain assets, whether it be an IRA or an annuity or something that's taxed a certain way. We just might suggest, if you're looking to give them the best situation possible because they're young, look as far into capital gains